Thank you very much, Andy. Good to see you. Welcome. Fresh Streams is a movement that takes the Spirit seriously, and I think it's fair to say that charismatics have not always been renowned for thinkers. Well, it's good to know that we can disprove that theory for the next 2 days, because I remember as a young guy preaching, and you go and stand at the door on the way out, and people, you shake people's hands, and this lady came up to me and said, "Well, you really made me think this morning." And she said it as though thinking is the last thing you're supposed to do when you go to church. So I want to encourage you to do some good thinking. There's a lot of wisdom in the room. So the way we establish and set these theology schools out is that there's loads of space for group discussion and panel feedback, and we'll draw out, hopefully, some of the, as well as the contributors, of course, the wisdom in the room. Now, when I became Christian when I was 19 years old in 1980, not long after a David Watson campaign. I love David Watson, he's one of my heroes of the faith. But it took me another 10 years before I fell in love with the church. I don't know whether you were like that. I like Jesus, but I wasn't struck by the church. And it took me ages and ages and ages. So I had a second conversion. And my second conversion was when I began to see that there's nothing quite like the local church when the local church works well. Because we all know that the local church is the most annoying, frustrating, irritating, it's sort of, I find myself often saying this church does me head in. And it's the most beautiful, warm, revolutionary thing on planet Earth. So we're going to be thinking in my little session before I introduce Steve on why spend 2 days thinking about ecclesiology? What is it and why does it matter? And the notes for this are on the inside of this little program. As Andy said, this is our fifth summer theology school. 2 in Newcastle, 1 in Worcester, and 2 here. And just so as you know, and let's make this clear, the subject is determined by the delegates of the previous year's January conference. How many of you come to the January conference? Okay, so that's a gang of you who go to the leaders' conference, mainly leadership teams, ministers and so on, in January. And the way it works is we offer them 5 or 6 options, and in good Baptist fashion, they choose the one which they think is the one that's the sort of hot potato that they want to spend a couple of days grappling with. And surprise, surprise, at our 2022 gathering when we came here, 91% of our delegates at the previous Fresh Streams conference had asked us if we'd explore sexuality. So we spent 2 days here exploring sexuality. We were eternally grateful for the decision of our Fresh Streams conference for choosing that. Andy and I our black eyes have just died down now, and it led to us going around 10 of the 13 associations, and it was incredible actually. And I don't want to sort of park that conversation because it's not parked really. But the thing about the theology school is, when there are Christians in the room, it ought to be possible to have a better conversation. And there's something about being encouraged to be Baptist here, which should enable us to have a better conversation. Well, 78% at the last January asked if we'd look at the topic of ecclesiology. So it must be a hot potato. And a few of you have said to me on the way in, I'm really looking forward to talking about ecclesiology, which is not the sort of normal run-of-the-mill conversation you have with people, is it? So what is ecclesiology? Well, I looked in the Oxford Dictionary and it said this: it is the study of churches, especially church buildings and decoration. And before we move on from that, that's what it said. And actually, there's significant truth in that, isn't it? Because the way churches look say a lot about their ecclesiology. In Tarpley Village, where I'm a minister, we have an Anglican church and a Catholic church. And you don't need a notice on the front of the church to say which one we are. Because the building is a giveaway. But we're going to be focusing mainly on the second interpretation or definition. Theology is applied to the nature and structure of the Christian church. That's what we're going to be thinking about. I just want to say a few things here about, without stealing Steve's thunder, because he's going to look at ecclesiology in the Bible, but obviously this is rooted in the idea of ecclesia being a word in the Bible. Which means called out ones. And there's a few texts there. Acts 11:26 says that Barnabas and Saul met with the ecclesia, the church, in Antioch. And in 1 Corinthians 15:9, Paul says that he persecuted the ecclesia of God. The called out assembly, then, is a congregation of believers whom God has called out of the world and into his wonderful light, as it says in 1 Peter 2:9. The Greek ecclesia is the basis for our English words, like, you're familiar with these, ecclesiastical, pertaining to the church, ecclesiology, the study of doctrine concerning the church. And so in this sense, ecclesiology is about the way we do church, our identity, our values, our structures, our polity. A bit of information about the church scene. I looked this up in preparation for this. Every church, even sometimes of the same denomination, does its ecclesiology differently. I've been the minister of 4 Baptist churches, and they all assume that every other Baptist church does its ecclesiology the same. It's total nonsense. They're all, it's nuanced, but they're all different. In Stafford, there are 3 Baptist churches: Rising Brook Baptist Church, Stafford Baptist Church, and the Beacon Church. And I can tell you now that they're not all the same. And I can tell you now that they do their ecclesiology slightly differently. One such difference is to do with the role of leaders and the way they are recognized and appointed, and we'll drill into that and think about that. There are estimated to be 2.5 billion Christians around the globe, 45,000 different branches, 45,000 different denominations. In the UK, there are 10 major mainstream groups, all of whom do their ecclesiology differently. Anglican, Catholic, Methodist, Baptist, URC, Salvation Army, Pentecostal, New Churches, Independent Churches, Orthodox Church of Scotland. And you know that within the Protestant Church, the 3 main forms of polity, again, we'll think about this, are Episcopalian, Presbyterian, and Congregational. Though we all know, if we're Baptist, that the one nearest to the biblical model is Congregationalism. There is a 4th option, which is very tempting: dictatorship. I don't know whether you've ever been tempted by this. There are occasions when I'm tempted to join the Roman Catholic Church, but I love my wife too much. So why does it matter? Why spend 2 days thinking about this? Well, rather than answer that, I just identified a few quotes that really struck me from the great and the good. Here's Miroslav Volf, one of the, in my view, finest theologians, particularly on the subjects around the Trinity. This is what he says: whatever the church looks like, it should reflect the image of the Holy Trinity. I read that and I thought, you're having a laugh, aren't you? Oh, genius. Here's a nod to Jürgen Moltmann, who died in recent days. Ecclesiology can only be developed from Christology. That's a good one to think about. Here's one from my college principal way back in the day at Cliff College when I studied there under Dr. Bill Davis. And in your 20s, you're just like a sponge. So as far as I'm concerned, Bill Davis is the 4th person of the Trinity. And this is what he said: John Wesley believed, though he might not have used these words, that our ecclesiology should be shaped by our missiology, not the other way around. That's an interesting one for Baptists to ponder at the moment. And I can't quote people without, of course, mentioning N.T. Wright in his big book on Paul, Justification, God's Plan and Paul's Vision, says this, and I love this: yes, say the scoffers, ethnic divisions are broken down, we know that, but why make such a fuss about it? The answer is that the church, thus united through the grace of God in the death of Jesus, is the sign to the principalities and powers that their time is up. The church is a sign to the principalities and powers that their time is up. And then Brad Harper, an American theologian, says this: for just as we communicate to one another the good news of God's love when we forgive one another, so too we communicate to the world that God has sent his Son when we are one as God is one. Disunity, on the other hand, communicates to the world that God has not sent his Son. So the stakes are high, really, aren't they, when you just consider and reflect on those quotes. We know that there's a debate going around the Baptist world at the moment. I'm trying not to be exclusively Baptist, but I know that most of the delegates here are Baptist and understand the Baptist way of doing things. But it's a contested area at the moment, and one of the areas that's being contested, and let's not leave it as an elephant in the room, we're free to talk about this but not stress on it, is whether our Baptist churches should stick with the declaration of principle or whether we should be declaration of principle plus churches. You had that debate, you're thinking about that one, do we need a statement of faith, etc., etc. That's just one area that's being contested in our movement at the moment. In our little church at Tarpley Chapel, one of the members of my congregation is the former principal of Spurgeon's College, whose books you will have read, Dr. Nigel Wright. And he's fantastic. He's great value. He is a model of what retired Baptist ministers in churches should be like. He's just genius. And we went down to the assembly in Telford a couple of weeks ago, and I told him this is what we're doing this. And I said, so Nigel, in the 90s and the noughties, what were the big issues around ecclesiology that you were discussing at that time? And he reeled off 3 or 4, which, it made me realize that we're not reinventing anything here. And then he came out with a classic comment, which I thought I'd leave you with. Beware creeping Presbyterianism. You like that? If you don't know what it's mean, just ask the person next to you. Beware creeping Presbyterianism. We'll find out over the next couple of days what that means. I just leave you with the thought that I think this subject of ecclesiology will be and is actually probably one of the most contested areas of reflection in our movement at the moment.